Hi, this is David Miller, and I'm here with the sixth in a series of mini lectures on Richard Wright's novel, Native Son. Today we're going to talk about Book 3, Fate. The action of Book 3 is foreshadowed in the opening pages of the novel. When Bigger steps out onto the street that first morning, he sees a giant re-election poster for State's Attorney Buckley. I bet that son of a bitch rakes off $1 million in graft a year. Boy, if I was in his shoes for just one day, I'd never have to worry again. You might notice here an echo of the admiring tones in which Bigger and Buddy had spoken of the rat. Gee, but he's a big bastard. That son of a bitch could cut your throat. Bigger doesn't see Buckley as his enemy. He laughs, calls him a crook, and envies his success. Buckley is a rat on a grand scale. In the same way that the rat-killing episode foreshadows the manhunt for Bigger, so this image of the state's attorney as the grand rat of corruption foreshadows the trial in Book 3. Buckley's eyes in the poster follow the onlooker. He points an accusing finger into the street under the motto, "You can't win." This is also a motto for the action of Book 3. It's the central problem Bigger has to confront. When Mr. Max comes to talk with him after the inquest, that's what Bigger says. But I can't win. That's what the title of Book 3, Fate, seems to mean. As the action opens, Bigger is lying in his cell, immobilized with depression, unable to eat or speak. His urge to kill is now directed inward upon himself, preempting the legal machinery that will kill him in due course. There was no day for him now, and there was no night. There was but a long stretch of time that was very short. And then, the end. But the novel cannot end this way. Bigger can't just surrender to his fate. He has to come to terms with it. And to do that, he has to resist it. Otherwise, his story will be the one told by the newspaper articles he reads in his cell before and during the trial. Though the Negro killer's body does not seem compactly built, he gives the impression of possessing abnormal physical strength. He is about 5 feet 9 inches tall, and his skin is exceedingly black. His lower jaw protrudes obnoxiously, reminding one of a jungle beast. A passage like this may seem over the top, but the editor of our edition, Arnold Rampersad, makes it clear in the introduction that it's all too realistic. Many details of Bigger's trial are taken directly from newspaper accounts of the trial of a young black man named Robert Nixon in Chicago in 1938. Securing virtually all the newspaper clippings about the Nixon case, Ampersad explains, Wright used many of its details in his novel. These details included copious examples of raw white racism, especially in depicting the black defendant as hardly more than an animal. If you're curious, you can actually read about that Robert Nixon trial on Wikipedia. If Bigger doesn't fight back, this is the way his story will be told. That's why the central conflict of Book 3 comes down to the question, who will set the terms for how Bigger's story is told? When Buckley demands to know why Boris Max is willing to defend scum like this, the answer is precisely that he wants to challenge the way the story is being told. If I can make the people of this country understand why this boy acted like he did, I'll be doing more than defending him. Bigger himself feels the need to tell his story as well as the impossibility of doing so. When the state's attorney invites him to confess, "Tell me everything that happened," the narrator tells us Bigger knew as he stood there that he could never tell why he had killed. It was not that he did not really want to tell, but the telling of it would have involved an explanation of his entire life. Which is to say, the only adequate form Bigger's confession could take would be that of the novel itself, an explanation of his entire life. This need to be known and recognized is still a driving force within him. The actual killing of Mary and Bessie was not what concerned him most. It was knowing and feeling that he could never make anybody know what had driven him to it. His crimes were known, but what he had felt before he committed them would never be known. He would gladly have admitted his guilt if he had thought that in doing so he could also have given in the same breath a sense of the deep choking hate that had been his life, a hate that he had not wanted to have but could not help having. How could he do that? The impulsion to try to tell was as deep as had been the urge to kill. Here again we see the affinity between Bigger and his creator, between the act of murder and that of explaining the murder. That this impulsion to try to tell is what drives the action in Book 3. The action unfolds in 3 broad movements, before, during, and after Bigger's trial. The first 2 movements, before and during the trial, each divide into 3 stages. The third movement, a final scene in Bigger's cell before he is executed, is brief, but it brings the action to a powerful close as Bigger finally gains control over his story and, having done so, is able to accept its end. The first movement begins in the gray fog of depression I mentioned earlier. The coroner's inquest into the murders is cut short when Bigger passes out. He comes to in his cell and reads the first newspaper accounts describing him as an ape from the jungle. The first stage of the action in this movement develops through a long scene in which a series of visitors comes to Bigger's cell, each one unfolding a different aspect of his crime and its consequences. Reverend Hammond forces Bigger to rethink and reaffirm his resistance to Christianity with its message of submission. Be like Jesus. Don't resist. Ironically, it is the communist Jan Erlone, forgiving Bigger and offering to help him, who creates the first breakthrough in his consciousness. For the first time in his life, a white man became a human being to him, and the reality of Jan's humanity came in a stab of remorse. He had killed what this man loved and had hurt him. He saw Jan as though someone had performed an operation upon his eyes. This moment is crucial because it shows how remorse, recognition, and forgiveness are connected. It's as close as right will come to the sort of moment Dickens would create. You remember how Pip read the scriptures to Magwitch in prison. Here, redemption comes not from the minister with his Bible stories, but from the communist, who grants Bigger full humanity in spite of his crimes. When Jan recognizes Bigger's humanity, it triggers an answering recognition in Bigger, and on the basis of that recognition, Bigger can finally feel compassion for Jan and remorse for what he's done. This is the true moment of conversion, the moment in which Wright tells us, choosing his words with great care, the Word had become flesh for Bigger. This stage of the first movement comes to an end with Bigger's confession, followed by an emotional breakdown. The second stage returns him to the inquest. Here the emphasis falls on Bigger's sense of being displayed before a hostile gaze. He longed for something to happen so that the white faces would stop staring at him. He feels this way not out of guilt for his crimes, but because, as he thinks to himself when he sees Jack, G.H., and Gus outside his jail cell, he has taken fully upon himself the crime of being black. He reads in the newspaper that the brutish Negro seemed indifferent to his fate. He acted like an earlier missing link in the human species. And in the gaze of the white faces assembled for the inquest, he feels shamed by that image. After the inquest, the police drive Bigger to the Dalton house and order him to reenact the rape and murder of Mary Dalton while they watch. Again, he feels like he's being made into an alien spectacle. He felt the eyes of the men upon him and his body stiffened, flushing with hot shame and anger. And he refuses, resisting the image they project onto him in the only way he can. This stage closes with the image of the burning cross, which causes Bigger to tear the wooden crucifix from his own neck and throw it away. When he sees the Reverend Hammond again, he smashes his face with the cell door and sends him away. The final stage of the first movement features Bigger's first extended interview with his lawyer, Mr. Max. It's his first chance to try and explain himself, and a great deal is at stake. A wave of excitement flooded him. He felt that he ought to be able to reach out with his bare hands and carve from naked space the concrete, solid reasons why he had murdered. He felt them that strongly. If he could do that, he would relax. He would sit and wait until they told him to walk to the chair. And he would walk. Walking to the chair, to the electric chair, instead of being dragged or carried, is the only form of dignity left to Bigger. In the conversation that follows, he is not only explaining his actions to Mr. Max, he's trying to understand them himself. If he does, he can accept his fate, the death that awaits him. Bigger has never had such a conversation in his life. Its importance is indicated by the way he feels afterward. He could not remember when he had felt as relaxed as this before. As I explained earlier, this lessening of bodily tension is a sign of overcoming repression. In terms of the symbolism developed in Book 2, it's as if a head is being restored to the body. The head stands for recognition, for the understanding that enables feelings to become conscious. He had not thought of it or felt it while Max was speaking to him. It was not until after Max had gone that he discovered that he had spoken to Max as he had never spoken to anyone in his life, not even to himself, and his talking had eased from his shoulders a heavy burden. The conversation has these effects on Bigger because it is resuming and extending the revelation he experienced with Jan when the Word became flesh. In that revelation, Bigger discovers his own humanity in the mirror of the other person, much as Pip and Miss Havisham in Great Expectations discovered their feelings when they saw them mirrored in others. In Max's asking of those questions, he had felt a recognition of his life, of his feelings, of his person, that he had never encountered before. He wondered if it were possible that after all, everybody in the world felt alike. Did those who hate him have in them the same thing that Max had seen in him? The thing that had made Max ask him those questions? Alone in his cell, after Max has gone, Bigger struggles with the feelings and ideas the conversation has aroused in his mind. He works through a series of visionary images that give shape to the intuition that we are all equal in our basic humanity. A vast prison with innumerable cells that isolate each inmate in his or her private darkness. Himself reaching out with his hands to touch other people and finding that their hearts, like his, supplied a current of electricity flowing as if through wires from a battery so that he could feel the life within them. A vast crowd of men, all races and colors, with their differences melted away in the heat of the sun. These visions inspire in him the desire to live in order to understand his connection to other people. Next time, we'll see how these visions form the turning point in the action of Book 3.